understand that we have a large group of people already gathering with us, and we are very, very grateful. And we'll just wait just a few minutes here to have to give more folks a chance to sign on. But we would ask you to tell us in the chat where you're coming from, because we are very interested to know what parts of our world are being represented in this conversation tonight. And while we are waiting to get completely underway, I want to go ahead and say that we all need to acknowledge our existence on land that was owned by our Native sisters and brothers in one time past, and all of us need to always hold them in our hearts and always have great gratitude for our presence here, living in the places where their ancestral homes were, sometimes without the gratitude that we ought to really be showing to them. I think it's something that needs to always be on the top of our minds, because it will help us, I think, to moderate some of our behaviors a little bit more when we do that. And welcome from all of these amazing places. I'm just looking at they're so fast I can't read them actually, but it's wonderful. I do know that someone registered from Uganda, and I also know today someone was reaching out to me from Ontario to join us tonight. So I'm just really grateful that the word is gotten around and that people are interested in talking about hope. So I think I will just go ahead and get started. And I want to start by saying thank you to all of the people who have registered and made the time to join us tonight, for your willingness to take this time out of your schedules to come and be with us. I want to start by saying thank you to the Episcopal Divinity Seminary for stepping up to the plate and being willing to change this program tonight from a meeting, which I was thinking was going to be adequate, which only allows you to have 1,000 people in it. And we've ended up with 2,000 people registered. And so the Episcopal Divinity Seminary was willing, with their wonderful Dean, Lydia Buckland, to take on the task of giving us a license for the webinar tonight. And I'm very grateful, and very grateful also for the assistance that she has provided through Mary Grace Pushka and her other staff, and also my own staff person, Chelsea Glasgow, and Michael Knoll, both of whom are people that have been very supportive of me and helping me with the details of tonight. And then I have the special gift here of being able to introduce my wonderful conversation partners. And in the last 10 years of my work in the Episcopal Church, I've had the wonderful opportunity of working with these bishops in different places. And I want to start by just introducing Bishop Hunn and Budde from the Diocese of Washington, D.C., who maybe is the most famous of us on the screen. And also Bishop Michael Hunn from the Diocese of, I think it's the Rio Grande, but maybe, I don't know if you say it the same way I do as a good old Southerner. But and you all can say more about yourselves as you go along. And Bishop Craig Loya, that I met during the pandemic and the George Floyd struggles that we were having. And all of these bishops have been people that have made it clear where they stand and who they are, and how much they honor the call to be faithful. The little thing on the flyer that we put out says that we need to speak so people are not confused by our silence. People know where we stand, and these bishops have made it clear where they stand in terms of being faithful and in terms of being people who are trying to bear witness to the call that we have said we want to follow as followers of Jesus Christ. And I am so honored and so grateful for your witness and for the ways in which you have been affirming and supportive of me and my work, and for the ways in which you stand in the world to bear witness to Jesus. Thank you. And thank you for saying yes to this event tonight. And here we are. You have helped me to cook up this conversation on hope tonight, and we have had just a marvelous response to it. And I know that some of that comes out of the fact that there is so much brokenness at the present moment among us, and so many things to be concerned about, and so many things to be fearful of, and so many things to challenge us in our capacity to be decent human beings and human beings who are trying to love and care for one another. And it is important that we have these conversations and that we hold each other in one another's hearts and that we tell the best truth we can tell. That seems to me to be where we are and to be what is called for. It's not always easy to discern what the truth is in confusing times like this, but it is always true that love and care and generosity and honoring each other is always not that hard to figure out. And we need to always be erring on the side of that, I think. So I want to just dive right in here with you all bishops, my friends and fellow pilgrims. And also I just would say one other thing. We talk, I love the image of wounded healers that Henry Nouwen has presented to us. So I want the audience to understand that all of us here are wounded healers, and we don't know all the answers, but we know where some bandage closets are, and we are sharing out of our understanding of having discovered some of those bandage closets. And so if you can hold that in your own hearts, then you can go away from this time tonight, hopefully with a capacity to move your own needle just a little bit further down the road to being a little bit more brave. So I want to just dive right in now and ask the three of you to talk to us a little bit about your own challenges as chief pastors in your diocese, the challenges between being pastoral leaders and bringing a prophetic message, which means that you have to hold people in your hearts in ways, but you also have to tell the truth. And folks don't always want to hear what the truth is. So how are you finding that, and how do you go about doing that and speaking to that? And I would just ask you to start, Bishop Marianne, if you don't mind.
Hi, everyone. Really great to be with you. Thank you, Catherine, for organizing this. Hi, colleagues. Good to be with you. I think there are many ways, and I look forward to hearing what Craig and Michael have to say, but one of the ways I think about the creative relationship between pastoral and prophetic is to, first of all, always recognize that I stand underneath the same prophetic call of everybody else, right? So I'm not, if ever I am speaking prophetically, whatever that means, but I think what it means in your description and mine is that we are perhaps giving voice to something that feels of God that is uncomfortable for us to hear, right? For whatever reason, it's just hard. And that, so to do that, I try to do that in a pastoral way, to recognize that it's hard and that it speaks to me as much as anyone else. I think it's more, I run into dangers if I think I have a prophetic word for somebody else when I'm not under the same mandate of what the Lord may be saying. So that's one way to think of it. And for me, and then also the pastoral side is always that everyone, as Brian Stevenson would say, everyone is more than wherever we stand on a given issue or how I may feel about them in a given moment, that their full dignity as human beings is never in question, no matter who they are or what positions they hold or what they've done. And so that for me is also a really important pastoral dimension, no matter what I'm saying, that I am called to honor the dignity of every human being and to care for them as God cares for them. So I'll stop there and see what wisdom will drop from the other two.
Right. So either of you, Bishop Craig or Michael?
Well, I'm Michael Hunn. I'm the Bishop of the Diocese of the Rio Grande. That involves the entire state of New Mexico and the far west part of Texas. So I look after El Paso and everything going out to Marfa and in the Big Bend. It is a part of the world that encompasses 40% of the US-Mexico border. And it is also a place that is still deeply indigenous. And so being where I am in my context, it is always very clear that the Anglo-Episcopal Church, the Europeans with skin like mine were the last to get here. And so there's a wonderful mixture of cultures there. As the Bishop of the Diocese of the Rio Grande, I see that there's not a huge difference between the prophetic and the pastoral, in the sense that I'm trying to speak the truth of Jesus Christ to everyone that I meet. And my diocese is about half Republican, half Democrat. And it's particularly challenging these days to speak the truth of Christ without sounding political, because we're in such a polarized political climate.
Right.
And so I come to this conversation with a deep conviction that it is the Christian hope that binds us together. That's not a blind optimism. We're living in a moment when our faith calls us to go deeper and to speak for justice on behalf of people who are in danger and who are worried and vulnerable. And I want to reflect today about how Christ anchors us in that hope, and how faith compels us to do justice, and how truth has to be spoken with compassion so that other people can hear. So for me, when I don't think of myself like I'm going to be prophetic today, instead, right, I'm trying to figure out how can I communicate God's love for everybody in a way that the people I'm talking to can really hear it in their hearts and know that it is true for them and for those who are vulnerable.
That's beautiful.
Bishop Craig, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's, I love that from both of you. First of all, I just want to say how great it is to be with all of you. I think a principle that I live by is anywhere Dr. Catherine Meeks, Bishop Hunn Budde, and Bishop Michael Hunn are going, I'm going there. So I'm going to follow wherever they're going. So I'm glad to be here.
We're with you, brother. We're
Amen.
also
Yeah.
Amen.
Glad to be here. I would sort of build on what Bishop Hunn said a little bit. I think I don't think about the pastoral and the prophetic aspects of our work as being separate things, but really being two ways in which we carry out the same core work, or two keys in which we sing the same Jesus song. And so I would say part of the way that those two things hold together in my own mind and heart is by always doing everything we can to first and foremost stay grounded in what we are for as followers of Jesus. And essentially what we are for as followers of Jesus, the purpose of our lives as followers of Jesus, is to join every breath that we have to God's project to heal the world with love. That's what we're for. And the way that we do that is by organizing ourselves into small communities of witness and resistance. And that's true no matter what the political weather looks like in any period, right? We are called to witness in every way and in every place with every moment to God's vision of the beloved community. And we're called to use our lives to resist the ways in which the forces of evil corrupt and destroy God's beloved children. So that's one way that I hold those two things together. The pastoral and the prophetic are really just two ways of carrying out that same work. And the second thing I would say is I think this is a moment when we are really called to be radicals. And I don't mean radicals in the sense of extremists. I mean, God knows we have enough of that in the world in this moment. But I mean, we're called to be radicals in the literal sense of that word, which is returning to the root of things. And the prophetic mode in Scripture is really about what the prophets did, is they're always calling God's people back to what are we for? What's our core purpose? What did we agree to? What does it mean to be faithful to the covenant that we have with God? So I think this is a moment for us to be radical in the literal sense of that word, to be calling ourselves and one another back to the root of what we're for as followers of Jesus. And the pastoral work that we have is really, how do we love people? How do we nudge people? How do we companion one another into that core work of returning to the root?
So so you make me want to deviate from my own script that I sent to you by raising this business about returning to the roots. Because one of the questions that I had sent to you, and I'm going to skip to it, is where do we see God in this? You know, people have a habit of I mean, I hate it when people say somebody got hit by a pickup truck and they say, well, it's God's will. I don't believe that. But I think that God is always present and God is always in everything. And we have to deal with the reality that sometimes things don't look like what we think they ought to look like when God's in it. So I want to ask the three of you to talk about where is God in all this mess that we've got going on right now. And when you bring up, Bishop Loya, the returning to the root and remembering what we're called to be about, you know, God is present. God is called or not called, Jung said, God will be present. And I believe that. So can you all talk about that a little bit? Because I know there are a lot of folks who wonder, did God forget about us?
Well, that's the human struggle whenever there's hardship and strife, right? Whenever there's pain. And when we're going through it ourselves, it feels like we're the first ones ever to have experienced, right? Or it causes a faith crisis. And I'm speaking for myself as well as anyone else, that because it feels, as Christ felt in the garden, you feel abandoned, you feel alone, you feel as if the moorings upon which you thought your existence were held are giving way. And so I think that from a perspective of just pastoral honesty, to acknowledge that sometimes we don't know where God is, in the sense that we can't feel or sense it. You know, there's that wonderfully haunting song that Mark Miller, the musician from Yale, has written about God in the absence of God, that you believe in the sun even when it's not shining, you believe in love even when you don't feel it, and you believe in God even when God is silent. And so I think there is an acknowledgement that sometimes it feels like God is silent, or that God is gone. And it takes every ounce of faith to look and to seek and be met by the grace of God in those moments. And you can't fake that, right? You can't, like you said, you can't just sort of gloss over it and say, well, God meant for that, or God's always here. I mean, you have to be met by God in those moments to know that God is there. And we don't control that, right? We don't control that. But when it happens and people have different experiences of it, you can't ever forget it. And maybe the memory of it from a previous time can help us get through. Or maybe it's not my faith today, but maybe it's Michael's or Craig's or yours that will sustain me when I feel like I don't have it. And do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's so I don't want to I don't want to be Pollyanna about the presence of God if the existential experience is one of being left on our own. But then those moments come when we're open to them. And sometimes it's through the reading of scripture or being in a sacred space, or God can show up anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like, so and I think that when people speak from that place, there's an authority that is theirs. And you can't, there's just there's no arguing with it. But you also can't give it to somebody who isn't feeling it. You can just simply, as Craig was saying, you can witness to it and maybe surround that person with the love you believe God has for them, right? Which is what
it's kind of like insurance. You can't buy it when you need it. You gotta have it. I mean, it's got to be there.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's a gift, right? It's a mystery. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's a mystery, and so I don't want to shortchange the mystery. But having lived the mystery enough, comes the faith statement that God is always here, even when we don't feel it. And then looking back, we can, you take it on hope. You take it on faith.
I want to weave together the radical thing from you, Craig, and Marianne, from your personal perspective, in terms of saying that for me in this moment, I've had to go look for God. And for me, chasing God is always like hide and seek, and it takes effort, it takes practice. In our world today, and I think particularly in the United States, what it means to be Christian is a debatable thing that is not understood. And I think some of the confusion that a lot of us have been experiencing is like, wait, what? All these people are talking about Christian? And that I don't recognize Christian in what I see happening. And so for me personally, I have tried to really go to the root of my faith. I've spent more time in prayer. I've started reading theology. I've gone back to reading Bonhoeffer, particularly for this moment. I have, and part of what I have realized is that I find Jesus in acts of loving my neighbor, the neighbor I can actually see, my family, the people in my household, the people that are near me. The temptation is for me to lose my mind because of what's in the news. But when I actually say my prayers, read my scriptures, and love the person I can see, that's when I experience the love of God again. I experience the hope of God again. And I go, oh, right, you're right here. I get it. And that's the ground on which I can stand to proclaim faith to anybody else. So for me, the witness has to see Jesus first, right? And so in this moment of confusion, I'm trying to find Jesus for me. And then out of love for my neighbor, that's where I find Jesus. So it's about going to the places where the people are vulnerable right now, because Jesus shows up in those vulnerable places, not in the places of power. So I'm resisting my temptation to defend myself or be afraid for my safety, and instead trying to go to the places with love for others, because I know that's where Jesus is hanging out always.
Yeah, I love all of that. And I would also say, I think the fact, where do I find God in this moment, or where is God in all of this? I guess my answer to that is God is hanging out where God always hangs out, which is on the margins, with those who are afraid, with those who are targeted, with those who are pushed aside. You know, the fact that we call Jesus Christ Lord means that as followers of Jesus, we confess that our God fundamentally is a God who suffers, a God who suffers with all those in the world who are on the wrong side of power and politics and privilege. And like Michael, I think it's my job to show up in the places where God is. It's my job to join God where God is out in the world suffering, pointing to the hope that we find in the resurrection of Jesus over suffering. So I think God is in this moment where God always is, which is hanging out on the margins. In addition to that, I mean, I think I find God in all over the communities that I serve as the Bishop of Minnesota. You know, I see God at a ministry that we have in the southern part of Minneapolis called Casa Maria, which is really trying to help the Episcopal Church fulfill its commitment to migration with dignity. It's sort of a center that's serving recent immigrants with food and other kinds of relief and organization and ministry. I see God every time I'm there, every time I hear about what's happening there. I see God in the resilience of our beautiful small congregations. Minnesota is, you know, largely a rural state, and we have all of these congregations in these wonderful, beautiful small places who have never been at the center of power and privilege and have always existed on the margins. We have a number of congregations that are predominantly recent immigrants. We have a number of congregations that are primarily indigenous persons. And I see God in all of those, and find a great model of leaders to follow in a moment like this, where we find ourselves going to the margins again, where Jesus is.
Well, one of the questions that people had about from the questions that came to me prior to our gathering was how you take care of yourselves, what your spiritual practices are. And you talked about that a little bit already, Bishop Michael, but since you already sort of waded into that water, let me just go ahead and ask that we go to that question, because I think that people people don't know exactly what to do to hold on to themselves. It's like you've been swept up in a hurricane and you can't get to the center where you can find a space to sit and be still. And so how do we do that when everything is swirling? And as you said, Bishop Michael, when what you thought was a Christian, you don't know who that is now, because these are people doing stuff that in the name of Christianity that just blows your mind. And so now you got to kind of rethink yourself and get your bearings again. So what are the things that help you to do that, in addition to reading Bonhoeffer and praying, and want to go ahead and hear from the other two of you about that too? You want to go ahead, Bishop Loya, and start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I'd say a variety of things. I mean, one, every morning at 6 a.m., I sit down and do 20 minutes of centering prayer. And that time is, if those of you who know me will appreciate the fact that it's the hardest thing that I do all day, and I pretty much hate every minute of it. And the reason for that is that I'm so busy and active all the time that those 20 minutes are where I'm just doing nothing in the presence of God. And it reminds my sinful heart and being that I am actually not God, and that my job as a bishop of the church, as a disciple of Jesus, is to learn how to throw every moment of my life on the mercy and power of God. So that's a practice that is very difficult for me, and it's one of the most critical and important things that I do. I think the other practice that sustains me is I think this is a time when we're called to just saturate ourselves in Scripture all the time in everything we do. Because as one of you mentioned earlier, like, we've been here before. The kinds of challenges that we're facing in this political moment are things that our ancestors in ancient Israel and in Jesus's first disciples and over have met over and over and again throughout history. So I think just letting Scripture shape my imagination is a critical practice. I think a third practice is to study the lives of our ancestors in the lives of our saints. I had this afternoon a lunch with the retired clergy of the diocese, and we celebrated the Eucharist, and the priest who gave the homily at the Eucharist, it was the commemoration of Richard of Chichester. And I didn't know much about Richard of Chichester, and he reminded us that Bishop Richard of Chichester was on the losing side of the politics of 13th century England, and was pushed out of his diocese and not allowed to live in his diocese by King Henry III, because Henry III didn't like the choice of Richard as bishop. And the way Richard responded to that was, he didn't live in his diocese, but he essentially couch surfed with friends of his in the diocese for a number of years, and just quietly went about the pastoral work of being the bishop, hanging out with people that had been given to him. So I think reading the stories of the lives of our spiritual ancestors is critical. And then the last thing that I would say is play. And I don't mean play in a kind of frivolous way that denies or anesthetizes or dismisses the real challenge and evils that we're facing. But play is an essential part of remembering who's ultimately in charge of the cosmos. Mm. And where is it? Play is an essential practice of hope in my experience. One of my favorite quotations is from Thomas Aquinas, who wrote, unmitigated seriousness betokens a lack of virtue, because it wholly despises play, which is necessary for a life as its rest. And so, play can be an act of defiance in this moment, because it is embracing joy in the midst of suffering.
Oh, I love that. That's so wonderful. Yes, Bishop Marianne.
Oh, that is so good. And I've been reading preparing for a presentation I'm going to be giving, I've been reading a lot about the sociologist of religion, Robert Bellah. And one of the things he says about play, Craig, it's actually that our religious practices emerge, evolutionarily speaking, from the capacity to play. Because both play and ritual require what he called like a safe zone. You need to be able to step out of your world, all the things you do to kind of keep your world going, to play. And there's no, and you can, and he says you can see it in like in mammals or in children when they signal to each other that it's time to play. Everything else gets put aside, right? And ritual does the same thing. We step out of our world and we focus on those things that are not of, you know, what we're going to have for dinner and how we, you know, all the things that we organize by. So when you said that, it just made me smile. Well, I confess that I am an inconsistent practitioner of centering prayer. In fact, I'm an inconsistent practitioner of every spiritual practice that I have been drawn to over my life. And what I have come to know is that God is far more faithful to me than I feel I am to my practices. And so I just give thanks to God for that. But I do find that one of the places, and you know, I do all of them in one form or another, in scripture reading, the centering prayer, the all of it. But I think the one that anchors me the most, and it is most connected to my being, is writing. And I don't know why it not all the time, like it's not like every time I sit down to write, it's like that. But there is just something about the attempt to take everything that my life has to hold, and all the strands, and try to write something, try to articulate something that I feel most grounded. It's a very messy process for me. There's nothing neat about it. But it is something that feels for me to be one of the places where I am listening the most, and I'm also the most humble, because I know that it's not about, and anyway, so that's one. And then the other I would say is I get a lot of spiritual grounding, a lot of spiritual nurture and sustenance from the gathered community. And I'm an introvert, so it's not like I can, I'm not the kind of person that feeds off of energy, but there's something about the power of community and the way that you hear, like the way I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room and someone says something and it just feels like that's the spirit at work. And as leaders, I mean, I don't know if this is true for the three of you, but I'm often asked like what my vision is for things. And I never feel, in most instances, I don't feel like it's mine at all, but that I have to steward it. And often I hear the vision coming from someone else. And it's my job to kind of grab it and say, this is it. But it's the power of the Holy Spirit moving among us that I find in conversation with the writing practice, which is such a practice of solitude, where I find my most grounding. And then like my equivalent of play, I think, would be like just being outside, just getting out of my head, being in nature in some form or another.
I'm so glad y'all are talking about.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm so glad y'all are talking about joy and play, because I think the pursuit of joy is fundamentally a reminder of God's goodness in a time of craziness. And one of the things I'm actually mourning in this moment is we Rio Grande Borderlands is the ministry that we operate along the border. You can find it online. But with that ministry, there have been times when we have ministered primarily on the Mexico side because people were not allowed to come across the bridges in El Paso. There have been other times that we have been operating in the United States when people were allowed to claim asylum. And part of what I realize I'm missing is the witness and the joy of immigrants who have left everything, running for their lives,
Right.
bringing their children with them for months, often walking on foot, risking kidnap and often robbed multiple times. When we were ministering on the Mexican side, there were 500 people on the other side of the bridge, and it's actually talked about in a new book that's out called The Asylum Seekers by Christina Rathbone. But I remember when the kids would start to play in the street, you know, they're literally living in cardboard boxes and shacks up against the side of a warehouse. And there was a time when we brought like a projector and showed a movie on the side of the warehouse right there on the bridge. And the kids, you know, started eating the popcorn and laughing. And to see the joy in children is such a blessing and a gift and a reminder that we need to play too, you know, and we need to laugh. And so since we've had to shut the shelter down that we were running in El Paso, I have missed both the witness and the joy, because often when we receive people on the US side, ICE or the Border Patrol actually would bring the people to us.
Right.
And the children were exhausted and tired. The parents were exhausted and tired. They'd have the first shower and we'd feed them. And then, but the next day the kids would go out to the playground. And that wonderful sense of joy, that's a witness to the goodness of God. That's truth that we need to cling to whenever you feel despair.
Amen.
And thank you for mentioning the asylum seekers, because I've just been invited to do a podcast with the author, which I'll be doing in May. So everybody that's on this call, keep an eye out for that. But I want to say a word here about something. You all have brought up this kind of remedy of play and in being connected in ways that are, I think, representative of generosity and grace, and it's a way of affirming that we are living in an abundant universe with a God who cares about us, and we don't have to be limited by the external things that are happening. But how many times do we hear these kinds of sermons? You know, think about on Sunday morning, how many times do we hear sermons inviting us to play, to be happy, to be abundant, and to be generous, to seek beauty? I think that I have a real feeling of that we need to switch our gears here about some of the things we say to people. We say, go live in the world as, because there's an abundant God, go live in the world as God is an abundant God. But we don't tell people how to do any of that. And then when we get to this kind of crises, we have a bunch of people that don't know how to do what they need to do to survive the crises. So does that make sense? And you know, is that your sense a bit that I'm not just off on this limb by myself here, thinking maybe too bad for me that I missed the happy sermons, but I've been going to church a long time and I haven't heard many sermons that are really encouraging me to do what I do now, make greeting cards, and I'm giving them away. I've given away 1,000 greeting cards, 400 greeting cards already this year, and I'm going to make hopefully 1,000 as a part of my own commitment to affirming that God is a God of abundance, and that I can be a generous person in spite of all of the invitations to be afraid and worry about scarcity and everything. So I don't know, what do we do about that?
For me, the longing for that joy is why we need to be fierce for justice.
Yeah,
it's providing this. You have to have enough safety. You know that there's that verse in the Bible about in imagining the kingdom of God as a place where the old ones can sit in the street and watch their grandchildren playing. And both of those things, right? For the old people to feel secure enough, I can sit out here and watch the sun go down and enjoy my grandchildren without a fear for what's going to happen to them, without a fear for what's going to happen to me. That's the drive for justice, is to make sure that there is safety enough for us to play and enjoy God's abundance. And to me, the Christian practice has to be stay connected to the joy, stay connected to the abundance, stay connected to the love that God has created, And then
Mhm.
that's why we go for justice, to make sure that everybody has access to that, to make sure that it's not just the rich and the powerful and those who can control it, who have safety, a place to sleep, food to eat, a place for their children to grow up without fear. We need to be in touch with the fearlessness of the risen Christ in order to do justice in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say that one of my mission statements as a bishop is to try and raise the joy quotient in congregations. And it's kind of a, there are some places that are just naturally joyful, or they've cultivated joy, and joy is different than happiness, as we know. It's not necessarily dependent on circumstances, although you need to have some sense of safety to play, as you were describing so well, Michael. And but I think it's I think Episcopal congregation, we could really look at the way we gather in prayer through the lens of joy, see ways that we might we might not jump it up a notch or two. I mean, music obviously has a lot to do with it, and how we present ourselves, how we engage in that worship. So I really think you're onto something, Catherine. I don't know that it's not something that we should, you need to bring more joy, but
No.
it's like, it is a practice. To cultivate joy is a practice. And as Paul writes in Philippians, think of these things, all that is good and noble and true and worthy of praise. That's a practice. That's a discipline. It's not saying don't look at the pain, but don't miss this, right? Don't miss what's right with the world, what's good in human beings. Expand the lens. And so those two things are, that's the tension. Now it's a hard thing to do when you're standing in the middle of heartache, right? And you don't want to tell people to cheer up when they're in the throes of grief or fear, but it is it's part of the repertoire of our faith journey. And I think as leaders, we have a particular responsibility to pay attention to the atmosphere, the way people feel when they're in our presence or when they come into our churches. And particularly now, when it's just so easy to be negative, because there's so much to be negative about. It does take some intentionality to hold on to hold fast, as he says in that place, hold fast to that which is good, or to shield the joyous, as the Collect for Compline says. That those are spiritual practices that we especially need when life is challenging.
Yeah. And we don't want to substitute the conversation for joy. We don't want to substitute seeking joy for action and radical resistance. But I want the audience to be clear that we're not wanting to replace radical resistance to the evil and darkness that's walking around in our country with, well, just go be joyous and it'll all be okay. No, that's not quite the point. But the joy will generate energy that can help us in the resistance, I think, is the point.
Yeah.
And I can't keep up with it and make eye contact with all at the same time, but they're just some glorious things that people putting in the chat. And just really great things that people are sharing from their lives and their experiences in church. Thank you, all of you who are doing that.
I think what I would say, Catherine, in response to your question about, preaching and joy, one of the many weird things about being a bishop is that I rarely get to hear anybody else preach, right? So the only sermons I can, unfortunately for everybody in my diocese, the only sermons I can comment on are my own for the most part. But I would say I probably don't incorporate joy nearly enough into my sermons. But at the same time, I would say, this idea about joy and what's its relationship to justice and to the ministry of resistance that we're called to. Part of the thread that connects all of that for me is that, joy is something that is contagious. It's hard to teach someone how to be joyful. You have to catch joy. And one of the things, we all, no matter what our position is, in every human community that any of us are part of, we all get to circulate a currency. And so we can circulate the currency of joy. We can circulate the currency of hope. We circulate the currency of grievance, where we sort of bond with one another over I'm not talking about, big pain and suffering and injustice in the world, but the kind of way we can bond over our petty grievances about things not going the way we want them to with a community. And I think that part of this conversation is about hope. And I think part of having hope means all of us who are leaders, which is certainly everybody who's gathered in this meeting, like anybody can exercise leadership in any position. But part of leadership is about making an intentional choice to trade in the currency of hope and to trade in the currency of joy. And I love your quote, Marianne, your mission statement about elevating the joy quotient in congregations, and I do think that is an act, that in and of itself is an act of resistance, because it is defying the idea that the powers of injustice and the powers that cause suffering, have the final say over the world in our lives,
Right.
So someone asked, and I'm going to just deviate a little bit here, since we have sort of brought this to the table. What does resistance look like for us as people of faith in this present moment, given what we're up against? How do we do that? And how do you all are clearly resistors. I'm a resistor. Folks in this meeting are resisting. How do we do that better? How do we do that more? How do we encourage people? And how do we do it without looking down our noses at folks who aren't doing what we're doing? I mean, I think that's another piece of that question. So can we just talk about that a little bit? Is that too stunning of a question? I don't want to move y'all to silence here.
It's one that we think we have to think about a bit, Catherine. It's not one that I mean, of course, the word resistance calls to mind all kinds of things, but I think one of the more striking things to me about the reaction to the sermon I preached at the prayer service for the president's inauguration thing is that I was talking about very, very basic faith principles. Like they're not that, they're radical in your sense, Craig. They go to the root, but there wasn't like some radical new, it wasn't some out, it was just a really basic evoking of mercy and dignity, honesty and humility, right? Like that was it. And it had that reaction. So I'm thinking in a time like this, I don't know that we have to think of a lot of really grandiose things to do. It's just some of those very basic things. Now, it can be risky, like right now, caring for certain people right now has become riskier, and we're having to make a whole bunch of decisions about what we're going to do in response to these edicts that are wiping away practices that we thought were embedded in our society, and they're just going away. I mean, if you want to keep your funding, you've got to get rid of them all. And what are we going to do as a church? Are we going to walk away from our commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion? I don't think so, right? So suddenly that becomes an act of resistance where, 2 years ago, it was what we all saw when, you know what I'm saying? It's like the times change. And so doing very simple things can feel like this big thing. I'm not saying that there aren't really big things to do. I'm just saying that sometimes it's astonishing to me how little things can have that kind of impact in an environment where the tolerance for that very thing is so low, right? We're talking now about, there's this thing in the air about the sin of empathy, right? Like empathy is now it's just so, all right, so if we're going to have empathy for one another, that's an act of resistance, right? But
Yeah.
that's who we are, or that's in our best who Jesus calls us to be.
Mm.
So anyway, that's my thought. There may be others, but I'm sure
Yeah.
there are others, but I just offer that.
I love that. One of the things I think I may have said this to you in another context already, Marianne, but in terms of that moment in your cathedral and how it relates to resistance, one of the things that I keep coming back to that I'm so grateful for is that, in that moment, in that sermon, you were clear, kind, brave, and humble. And as I listened to that, I thought, this is what Christian leadership looks like. Those are all the qualities that Jesus embodied. And so I do think there's a way in which resistance in this moment is actually resistance to the cycle of reactive outrage that we are trapped.
I couldn't agree. The culture of contempt, right? This outrage industrial complex, right? That just wants us to be. Now, I'm not saying that we don't get angry sometimes. I get angry, but in the moment, I think that's resistance. Like, and King, Martin Luther King, when he said, I'm just not gonna. Hate is too big a burden to bear. I'm gonna go with love, right? I'm just not gonna give it back, and that is. It's sad to me that that's resistance, right? It breaks my heart that we use those words in resistance in the same sentence, but it does at least allow for something that we can all do. I mean, you make it sound like I thank you, Craig, for what you said, but it's actually, these are things that we all can do, and we all learn it. If you all learn that if you lower your voice, people hear you more clearly than when you're yelling. Right? That if you want to be heard, you need to reach people in a way that they're not going to just shut you off. I mean, like, all those things are true, and it's just practicing that.
I too struggle with even the word resistance. I mean, I go into Star Wars mode, and I've always wanted to be a Jedi Master. So that, that's cool. I can go there and get my lightsaber out. That's fine.
I think I've got one in the closet. I can pull out for you.
All right, I got mine too. All right. So, but when I'm thinking about resistance, immediately the question I ask is, what are we resisting? And to me, in this moment, it's about having clarity and truth. And it's about having clarity and truth about what the truth of Jesus Christ is and what it's not. So for me, what I'm resisting is the falsehood that violence and death are where power is to be found. It's resisting the falsehood that the way for me to be safe is to protect myself from everybody and arm myself to the teeth. It's resisting those temptations which happen in every human heart, and which Jesus Christ came to die on the cross to teach us a better way about. To me, what we're talking about, that you might use the word resistance for, to me is just about being really, really clear that the teachings of Jesus Christ, that Jesus is the truth, and that when we say forgive for real, that is the way, that is the truth for everybody. When we say that love is stronger than death, that is the truth. And we got to be clear about that truth and proclaim it and resist the falsehood that would deny the truth of the resurrection. So when we say, love your neighbor, that's the truth. That's the way we're going to get along. When we say that God is inviting everybody to the table, there is neither Jew nor Greek, all the divisions that we create around race and class and gender and sexuality, we welcome everybody because God is calling us to that, and that's the truth. So to me, it's resisting the lies that suggest that denying people's humanity and driving people out and using violence to control and building up in barns with all of our wealth, those are the things that I'm trying to resist by proclaiming the truth of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And we can't be timid. Go ahead.
I love all of that. And for me, I'd say, part of that resistance that we're called to, it's about being rooted, that I'm going to be every day doing everything I can in my own kind of broken, failed way to plant myself so deeply in the soil of God's love
Mm.
that the weather will not move me, you know, and as a bishop and a pastor, my job is to help the people that I love and serve to root themselves so deeply in the soil of God's love, that the weather is not gonna move them, you know. And I think this issue of hope and joy and the things we've been talking about, it's not, you know, it leaves room for anger, but I think
Thank you. Yeah.
I think the Christian posture
Yeah.
of anger is not the kind of reactive cycle of outrage that we see all the time. It's not that culture of contempt that you mentioned, Marianne. I think you know, the currency that we trade in around anger is lament. You know, it's not grievance. It's the biblical tradition of lament is about crying out to God, who is the ultimate agent and giver of justice, right? Rather than raging against a person or a, you know, which is all, you know, part of the human experience. But I think part of how we're called to the spiritual posture for our anger is lament. It's crying out to God in solidarity with all those who cry out for deliverance and relief and suffering and redemption.
Oh my goodness, this is so lovely. We need about 3 more hours of time with you. But so I want to go to a question that came up a good bit through the and I should back up a minute to say that one of my friends suggested that I ask the audience for questions prior to our gathering, and I did that, and I got a bunch of questions. And this conversation is kind of going along the themes that emerged out of those questions, and several of those questions was, what do we do about our young people? Our young people that are like 18 to maybe 35 or 40, because we're losing a grip in many, many ways with those folks. And we know in this country right now that our suicide rate and our alienation and loneliness quotients are just off the page. And that age group is so incredibly vulnerable. So how do we speak to that? Where, what do we do with that? How do we think about that? How do we navigate some of the challenges around that? Is a question that several people have asked, and some of them young people. And I think it deserves to be talked about, especially when we're trying to talk about how do you have hope when, you know, when we have a whole part of our collective that don't rightly have the tools to even try to go down that road at all. So I would want to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, I'm in my 60s now. I'm 65, and I have been studying and thinking a lot about what it means to be an elder and to live in that phase in life that Eric Erickson called the phase of generativity, which is the time in life when you see your life's fulfillment in the thriving of other people, and that's the spiritual task of growing older. And it's particularly poignant in that stage of the aging process where you're no longer at the center of things, that more and more you're moving away. You are no longer driving the car or the boat or the ship, right? You're actually giving it over to others. It's very hard to do, and there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of loss, but there's also a tremendous amount of joy in. So I say all that by saying I'm placing myself in the life cycle, right? I've got children in their 30s, I've got grandchildren, and I realize that part of my entire vocation now is I ask everything I do now, I ask through the lens of how am I making space, making room, pouring life into those who are coming up behind me, right? at every age, right? And it doesn't matter how old you are. You can be 25 and be doing the same thing, right? Because there's always somebody coming up behind you. But for me, I think, one of the things that gives me hope about the Episcopal Church is there are a lot of people my age and older. And if we could figure this out, if we could figure out the vocation of eldership, we would have a thriving church for young people, because they would be our priority. But what we haven't done, so I think the crisis is actually in eldership, because we have not learned how to age well. So we're hanging on to things that we really need to let go of, and we need to be pouring ourselves into, and not just my kids and my grandkids, but that generation. So I think it's an eldership task. I'm sure there are younger people on the chat that have all kinds of suggestions about what they need, but my job is to be in relationship, give as much of what I have away, financially, positionally, everything, and to make sure that I'm doing everything I can. And I feel like if we did that as a generation, those of us who are elders in the church, we would be able to do our part. We can't make it easier. What younger people are facing nowadays boggles my mind, right? It's stunningly difficult. So I understand all of that, but from a perspective of what, I can't speak for the whole world of what we are to do, but what I feel I am called to do is to dedicate my life to those who are coming up behind me.
Thank you.
You're asking that question, for some reason, the image that jumped into my head is, I was remembering a conversation I had with my son when he was in 4th grade. He's out of college now, but and he was having one of those, 4th grade crises, and those are serious. You feel that the whole house feels that, right? But what he said that I'll never forget was, "Dad, why would I want to grow up? I just have to do more homework and then go to work all the time." And all of a sudden I realized, like, oh my Lord, like, who's the example of grown-up that you are looking at? It is somebody who works all the time, right? Like, and I feel like that there is a sense in which we need to demonstrate that being a grown-up is a wonderful, joyful thing, that following, that being a grown-up in a church with community of people that we love is a wonderful, fabulous thing. Working towards a vocation, figuring out what God is calling you to do, loving your neighbor, developing the skills and the talents and the wisdom to, like, make a difference in the world. This is fun and it is good, because I worry that so many of our young people are looking at, like, am I ever going to get a job that has health insurance, or am I just going to be struggling my whole life? And is the environment going to be here for me? I'm not even worried about Social Security, because I know that's not going to be here for me. Like, why would I, given the nature of the world that I see all the way around? And so for me, I think it's two things. One, it is, we got to embody a joyful Christian adulthood and maturity that is worth yearning for, growing up to, And the second thing is, we got to get the justice thing going to make sure that our children will have a world and an adulthood that they get to inherit and receive. We got to do this in the church right now. We have most of the people in our church are in their 70s and 80s, and the church has worked well for them all the way through. It is time for us to be about a bequest and a birthright to the younger generations, where we're literally saying just what you said, Marianne, like, here's money, here's power, here's authority, here's our faith. We want to give to you all as a handoff, because we believe in you and we trust you. That we got to get serious about that and keep making the church in the image of those of us that are getting gray.
Yeah,
I think it's just, you can sort of, again, it's one of the things I look for when I come to a church is, like, who's up front? Who are the people up front? And if they're all my age or older, that speaks volume to, and it's not that we all know. Yeah. So anyway, I just feel like it's a really great calling, and we're perfectly poised to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of you. I think that's so brilliantly stated on both of your parts. I think the only thing I would add about our engagement, what your question was, Dr. Meeks, about young people, is that I think the church abandons the young people that you're describing and renders itself irrelevant every single time we look like our chief concern is acquiring more for ourselves and sustaining what we've got. The gospel is always compelling when it follows the example of Jesus that doesn't start with the question, how do we acquire more for ourselves? But how do we give ourselves away in love?
Right, right.
You know, one of the best ministries that I've had in my years as an ordained person is I spent a short amount of time as a school chaplain. And when I would do chapel with the high school students, it was terrifying for me because terrifying and exhilarating.
Yep.
And the reason it was exhilarating is because, you know, adults can be really polite. And so if I kind of phone something in a little bit with adults, they're not going to call me on, you know. And what I learned about the high school students that I was working with is that my homily didn't even have to be very good. If it was really me showing up with the fullness of myself, it was engaging. And if it was me trying to be smart, it was not at all engaging. And so I think that the church, the best way we can serve young people is by following the example of Jesus and by embodying the economics of the gospel, which means you are fed by giving and you live by dying. And whenever we show up in the world and do that, it is irresistible to the world because our souls are made for that.
So I'm 79, Bishop Marianne, so I've got a few years on you. And I love the notion of being a crone, which is a wise old woman. And I want to live into that with every bit of my energy. And I want to stay committed to being the mentor, supporter, advocate for every person who's younger than me, and particularly the people in the 18 to 40 age group. And I think that so many of our problems, our political problems even, are grounded in the fact that we have old folks who won't quit and let younger people come and bring their energy and ideas to the table. So I so think that the young folks who have put this question forward and who are in our parishes will be so grateful to hear you three leaders saying what you have said about that. And we don't have to just always be thinking about everybody going to seminary and becoming a priest in order to think that they're worthy of our support and energy and resources and engagement and investment in. So thank you so much for that, those comments. And Bishop Craig, your point about authenticity. I just think that authenticity actually works better with everybody than anything else. And I so remember and appreciate, and the part of what endeared me so deeply to you, Bishop Craig, was your talking about how quickly you had to get past any pretense when you came to be bishop in Minnesota, right a couple weeks after George Floyd was murdered, and that you were down to like, what do I have? What is the intestinal fortitude that I have to draw upon to do this job? And it wasn't about any kind of window dressing, because window dressing just isn't worth anything. It just isn't worth anything. So I want to say, I see that the time is going by so fast, but I want to hold up. This button says mercy, courage, action. And Bishop Marianne, you inspired us to start what we call the Plea for Mercy campaign. And we are now asking people to engage with us in getting buttons and bumper stickers and yard signs and t-shirts and billboards that say mercy, courage, action. And everybody who's registered for this event will get an email, get a link to how to get engaged with this campaign. And it was from your inspiration of your plea for mercy. You're asking the president to making a plea for mercy for those among us who are so vulnerable. So I just want you to know that we heard you, And a bunch of us, about 60 of us, gathered and started talking about what did we want to do besides just pat you on the back, because that wasn't what that was about at all. And so that is happening. And I just want people to know that we will be in touch with you about that. And then I want to now leave a chance for the three of you to think about what is the most encouraging words you can say to the folks that have joined us here. Over almost 1,000 folks have been here listening to this conversation. And over 2,000 have registered, which means that they will get the recording and will listen to it. And we have groups of people around the country in watch parties tonight listening to this conversation, because people are so hungry for a word of encouragement and a word of inspiration. So I want to give you all the last word here in saying something to people, whatever it is on your heart that you would want to say to these folks. And I want to let you have the last word. And I want to say that I so have appreciated being in this conversation with you. And I will keep looking for ways that we can continue to be making space for these kinds of conversations. So why don't we start with you, Bishop Michael, and then Bishop Craig, and then Bishop Marianne can go last.
Yes, indeed. So I've been a member of an associate of the Order of the Holy Cross for years. And one of their slogans, which is written on the wall of the monastery in West Park, New York, says, "Love must act as fire must burn and light must shine." And so my encouraging word is be light, be on fire with the Spirit, and may your love be action in the world. Just reach out to the people you can see and love them. Don't worry about changing the whole world, just change your neighborhood. God has given you talents and skill, and all you got to do is be light, be fire, and act based on your love. Over to you, Craig.
Thanks. The thing that I keep coming back to in these last few months is Therese of Lisieux and her spirituality, which is often called the little way. And her spirituality, which is often called the little way, is essentially the idea that Jesus does not expect us to do big things, but Jesus does expect us to do every little thing that is in front of us with the biggest possible love. So I am one person and you are one person, and together we are many people. And if every single one of us does the small thing in front of us with the biggest possible love, we will be an unstoppable force of light and love in a world that is starving for it. I'm so heartened and encouraged and grateful for everyone's participation and to be part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Glorious words have been spoken by my two colleagues. I feel that I simply want to create a space to allow them to resonate and to give great thanks to everyone who has been a part of this amazing conversation. And I'm so glad that we'll be able to read and keep, I can't wait to read the notes more carefully for all who have contributed in your way. As I said earlier, I find hope in the gathered community, and you all and my panel mates here are a great source of hope for me. And I pray that the living God makes a palpable impact in your spirit in ways that you can trust and that allow you to continue to move forward one faithful step at a time in whatever life is asking of you. And trusting, as I hope you know, that you're not alone, that there are that your God is with you, but also there are all these people in places nearby and far away that are striving to do something of the same, and that when you lose hope, they're there to hold you up, and someday you may be the one to be holding the rest of us up. And that's something of the mystery and the glory of the gathered community, beloved community, and the body of Christ. God bless you all.
Thank you. And don't you all go away too fast. And we'll say good night and thank you. And we'll see you again
Night,
when it's the
everyone.
right,
Thank
when
you
it's the
so
right
much.
time.
Good night.
So much.
Good to
Bye-bye.
be with you all. Good to be with you.